Hello. All right. I'm going to give a couple people some time to join us. Excuse me. There we go. There we are. Perfect. Welcome. Oh my gosh, if I spill this, that would have been horrible. Just keeping it real here. All right. Amazing. Some of you are popping in. Oh, and let me just make sure. I'm just making sure that the chat is active so that if anyone wants to use the chat for questions, you can use the Q&A for questions. Anything is open. So let me dive in. I know it's Thanksgiving weekend, and I do realize that this may be a little bit harder of a time for families to pop in. So I am recording it this time. I have a feeling we're going to have a great session. I can already see more people popping in. Welcome. So a little bit of housekeeping before we dive right in. This is the format that, well, we actually use all kinds of formats in the Blue Life Autism program, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the coaching sessions of what we do. And so in a webinar style, what that looks like in the program is sometimes actually pulling people in so that it's very personalized one-to-one coaching, but sometimes it's also wonderful to have just the ability to offer Q&A. People can show up with their hair all crazy and they don't have to worry about being on camera. We also do some meet styles, but it is good for everyone to have a little bit of a taste of that. So first of all, if someone would just give me a thumbs up in the chat that it is active, working, you can hear me well, and we are in business, that would be amazing. I hope everyone, I know many of you are from the States. You can tell me where you're from. I know many of you have likely had Thanksgiving yesterday. So, of course, all the things to be grateful for. All right. So, last piece of housekeeping is if you have a question, because I already can see some popping in, there are two ways to ask your questions. You can either drop them in the chat, which that is amazing, which nobody has let me know yet if they can hear me. So if someone could just give me a thumbs up, I know there are quite a few of you on here. You could even just tell me where you're from, the age of your child, anything. Just let me know you can hear me, would be amazing. Oh, perfect. Perfect. Okay, so there's already questions popping in, which I think is amazing. And yeah, you get to ask all the things. I will be fully transparent on everything. The other place, thank you so much. That makes me, yes, okay. That makes me feel a little bit better. Okay, so everyone can hear me. Yes, so already questions are popping into the Q&A. The Q&A will keep you anonymous. So please feel free to drop it in there as well. It's whatever you'd like. So yes, my first question is, how long did it take your son to recover? And did I use supplements? I think this is a great question, and it is definitely something that I'm gonna get really transparent on because did you eliminate gluten and dairy? Okay, so we'll start with question one. How long did it take my son to recover? Because what it says on paper is actually different than what I feel was his recovery time. So when we started our journey, he was 18 months old. And my family physician just like really caught it very quickly that he wasn't making eye contact all of a sudden. He had regressed in his speech. And so we started our journey at that point. So from that time that he was almost 2 until he was 5 years old, he was fully non-speaking with no interventions other than therapy that was available. And he went to speech. That was it. He went to speech therapy and occupational therapy. That's all we had accessible. And it was very limited. Like we only went once a week. Then at 5 years old, something happened where they basically told us that the likelihood of him speaking in school, now that he was in school and he was not catching up to his peers, was that we needed to do some sort of more in-depth intervention, which looked like iPad communication therapy, which that was my moment. That was my catalytic moment where I didn't want my son to be, and I understand that now having some form of communication is better than none. But back then, the thought of my child only being able to communicate via machine was very like new, and it was very taboo. And it just literally broke my heart. So I started to do massive research, take massive action. I was in healthcare. I had access to lots of data, like lots of books, lots of articles, lots of things like that. And I found nothing. And so it was actually only through the internet that I was able to find this journey of people who were claiming that they were able to reverse the spectrum with their children that were high functioning. So the conversation around a low functioning, fully non-speaking, inability to communicate anything, not even aware of his surroundings, was like not even talked about. So we went into this journey at 5 years old. At around 6, he was still non-speaking, but we had started our lifestyle journey. And by 7.5, he technically was released from all care because he was conversational, he was outgoing, and he was hitting most of the milestones for his age at that time. But his emotional intelligence did not come out until he was roughly, I'd say, between 8 and 9. And so for on paper, it looks like we started our health journey and he was done like at around 5.5, and he was released from all care at 2.5, at 7.5. But the truth is that it wasn't really till he was 9 that I felt like he was emotionally able to also match his peers, in the sense he wouldn't get teary over things as much. He wouldn't be as emotional. His emotional regulation was much better. So I hope that makes sense. So basically 4 years is what it took me. I did not have the knowledge that I have now. I was just at that time transitioning from healthcare into, I'd say I was into my detox specialty course, I think, and probably had completed my cancer prevention and longevity certification. So I only really had 3 nutritional certifications other than my background in healthcare, which was very different. It was more in anatomy and physiology and obviously pathology. So it was very different. It took me a lot longer than generally what we see in the program to get their kids to a more independent stature. Second question was, did I eliminate gluten and dairy? Yes, that was my first approach. At the time, there wasn't a lot of data on autism other than kids on the spectrum tested high for mercury, and kids on the spectrum had gut issues. And gluten and dairy are the most inflammatory things pretty much that we have that we do consume food wise. And so it just made sense to be the first things that we would eliminate. And now we have like tons of data that show that when we go gluten and dairy free for kids on the spectrum, 91% of children see better outcomes. That's like a staggering number. That's huge. So we can't ignore the data that's there. It is effective regardless of necessarily what culture we're in. We are a very bread and like carb and cheese heavy society. Doesn't matter what part of the world we're from. Now, saying that, there are different qualities of the breads and the flours that we use. The issue, I think, that what we see is that we see that all of the bread, all of the flours, all of the dairy has changed over time, no matter where you live. The quality has gone down. We're not getting these things from the areas we used to, right? So that's one thing to take into consideration when we are thinking about going gluten and dairy free. And like, let's just say, for example, we in our program, we have a very large Middle Eastern population, which is amazing. Don't get me wrong. Like, I think it's wonderful. They tend to take a food first approach. They're my people. And one of the things that they do often ask is like, well, we eat a lot of roti, chapati, and very specific foods. And maybe the first time that you do this, it's more about changing the quality of the flour and going back to more of that ancient grains flour and making your things from that and then transitioning. Okay, next question is, what supplements did I use? So the truth is that even throughout my journey, we did not use supplements, and this was in my favor. We have to look at, my son is 15 now, and back then he was like, that was 10 years ago. And there was no supplements for autism. I think back then, I think Dr. Campbell or Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride had just created like the first, I'd say, probiotic in that area called BioCult. And I did use some probiotics, but I actually chose to use probiotic foods. I used to have a counter, and I actually used to ferment kimchi, sauerkraut, real kefir with from organic whole milk, because that's all I had access to. It's illegal to have whole milk or raw milk here in Canada. What else did I use? Oh yeah, water, kefir, kombucha, all of these things I actually made from scratch. And I took that approach. I did use to supplement for a very short period of time. Oh, what do you call it? It was called, like, it was a blue ice omega-3s. And to me, none of these things were really making the difference. What we actually focused on was a food first approach, which is why I teach it. I know for picky eaters, that's really hard and my son was picky, just so everybody knows. My son only ate 3 foods. That's why I'm so passionate about helping kids overcome picky eating. Food and eating is a taught behavior. It's a learned behavior, not a survival instinct. And it is, as much as they say, genetic. Now in some research, they're not taking into considering that epigenetics, which is that which is above our genes, that's literally what it stands for, means the environment. Like, our environment is what is creating more picky eaters, are the way that we show up. So anyways, I'm really passionate about ripping that Band-Aid off first, because a supplement can only take you so far, and it's not going to reverse anything. It's not going to put anybody into remission. That is not going to be, it's not something I have seen. And if you look at all of the families that are seeing what they call complete remission, none of them are focusing on supplementation. They are focusing on a food first approach. So Ninka, if you look at Tina Sue, like, they are focused heavily on the nutrition aspect, because that's what shows that. Did you cut out meat for your child? Just plant-based diet? No, I did not. So back then, there was not as much data that I was looking into that talked about removing meat for a child. And so we basically did, I guess, actually, I wouldn't even call it a specific, because we did have whole grains that were in his life. We did go grain free for some time. And I regret it so much. I wish that we hadn't. I may have had higher results because of the amino acids in there. Like, now that I know what I know about plant-based eating, would we have gone plant-based? I'm not sure. Back then. I am fully plant-based now. Is that what I promote for families coming in? No, we actually mold our program to the families coming in for their lifestyle now. And we actually take, like, what they're eating, and I review for breakfast, lunch, and dinner on their onboarding call. And I make a plan on how to implement some of the better strategies that I've seen increase brain development supports that are tasteless and that can be added to things that kids enjoy. That is your first approach. And so I did not cut meat out. Did my son eat a lot of meat? Not really. We had a good diversity of, like, we were eating 50 plants per week just because I knew that whole foods was the most important. So we went on a whole food, like, I wouldn't even call it diet or plan. We went on a whole food lifestyle. At the time, I had just completed reading Tosca Reno, which she was very, I don't know if you may not know her. Back then I was working out a lot, and she really promoted this reversal of diabetes. And so her whole food was not a diet, it was more of a lifestyle. And so it just made more sense. Fermented foods, and a lifestyle approach. It was not a GAPS diet. It was not anything else. If you cut out dairy, how did he get enough calcium? I use almonds, but not almond milk. Because it's processed. This is a great question. Calcium can be found in so many different leafy green vegetables. You actually, per pound, like, and I know a pound of greens is a lot, but per pound you're getting, like, high quality calcium that actually does not leach out of your bones. Whereas when we have a high calcium diet, and this is one thing that I don't like about supplements. Like, if we look at, I just had a client one of the members in the program, where we were talking about a calcium deficiency for her son. And it wasn't even because he wasn't getting calcium from vegetables. He actually was supplementing so much that the synergy of what works in the body was being imbalanced with his supplement. And so it was literally like tanking his calcium. He was getting cramping, teeth grinding, like, all of these very big signs. And his blood work showed that he had higher phosphorus, which is another sign of calcium deficiency. The problem that you're not going to see in a calcium blood test is that it will never test for calcium. It will never test for a calcium deficiency, because when we are lacking calcium, our bodies just pull it out of our bones. And so, like, in our blood test, it's always going to look good. So unless we're really, and at that point we're having, like, rickets problems and, like, actual diseases. So Dairy has actually been shown to actually do the reverse effect in long term. I used to work in a densitometry field, and if you don't know what that means, it's when older people go, and after a certain age, we go get our bones tested to see if there's calcium and for the likelihood of breakage. And I can tell you that those who had a higher dairy diet actually generally were more osteoporotic. And so for kids, so now there is new data that does show that there is an impact of the inflammatory dairy that we have in our world today. And maybe that was different back in the day when we were having raw dairy or different, formats of non-processed dairy. But right now, our processed dairy is hurting our bones. It's not necessarily doing anything good to it. So almond is great. A lot of different nuts and seeds are great. Leafy greens are great. Like there's a little bit of calcium in everything. Kale has more calcium than spinach, which is why that if you see something that is like high oxalate, what lowers its oxalate value is actually the calcium in that food. So if you're eating if you're eating diversity, you are getting enough calcium. So I don't want you to worry about that. That's something we talk about a lot. So in our world today, organic dairy, it depends on how processed it is. Like when you process something, for example, and what I mean by process is that when you're going for like a low fat or even a 2% or a 1%, when you're even going into that organic, even though the quality of the milk is good, you're basically stripping the fat from it that is actually slowing down the absorption of lactose, which is the sugar. And so the more that you're looking at these different diverse processed ingredients in dairy, you're seeing spikes in blood sugar. So it is important to note that as well, is that lactose is still a sugar, and the more processed, even a high quality dairy is. Now, when it comes to yogurts, we didn't use a lot of yogurt. We use more kefir based foods. It has more data to it. Back in the day, yes, I did use that, but now we have so many available sources of dairy and yogurt. What about the keto diet for autistic kids? This is a great question, actually. We absolutely have some people in the program that do the keto diet. Generally, they do not do the Americanized keto diet, so no dairy. And they focus heavily, like the original keto diet was like nuts and greens, right? I don't think people realize the original keto diet was not meat-based. It was like invented by a gentleman who wanted to show that he could live forever. And his focus was on nuts and greens, and he pretty much only ate that. Nobody is really going to eat that right now, especially not our kids. But it was one of the areas that they saw massive improvements was in kids who had seizures and seizure activity. So because it lowers and puts us in ketosis. But we can become acidotic when we are in a keto state, which means our bodies can become so imbalanced that it becomes very acidic, and it is harmful to our kidneys in the long term. So is it a recommendation for what I would tell people to eat? Honestly, there's so many versions of keto out there. It's really hard to give an answer to that. But we do have some people in the program who eat a version of a keto that is much, plant-rich, dairy-free. And do they like it? Sure, it's their choice. I'm not here to tell them that it's not up to them. I can give them the data that shows, that keto can make you acidotic, but at the end of the day, it's everybody's choice is always going to be respective. Have you heard of mitochondria? Of course. Mitochondrial dysfunction is, and I don't use vitamins, so you can ask me that as much as you want. What we use for mitochondrial dysfunction is we call it a recalibration of our children's chemistry. There are very many foods that can help with our mitochondria much more effectively than any supplementation can. And so what that looks like is we have to think of what the mitochondria is, and inside of our cell, it's like our energy center. What gives us the most energy, and who gets to decide within our body the energy that is offered? And it's our microbiome. Our microbiome will be able to give, and our liver will be able to give the nutrients and convert nutrients so that they are high quality for our cells to absorb them and then convert into energy. So food is best, always, 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 always rip the Band-Aid off. We use there are 6 steps to recalibration that when families start in the program, which by the way, I don't know if anybody knows, is very open for enrollment right now. This is the first approach. We always focus on what is going to support the energy, which is mitochondrial support, that is going to open up the detox pathways. It's the same 6 steps. That's how easy. Like by doing 6 very simple things you are actually bringing in, and some of them are not even dietary related. And so 6 simple things, you are not only supporting your child's detoxification system, you're supporting their mitochondria, you're supporting better digestion because it also impacts their endocrine system, which includes supporting a healthy bile that can actually digest food. So we want to focus on that. What are your thoughts on baby formula in terms of toxicity? Should a child get off of it at 1 year old? This is a great question. And my answer to this is that we have to understand that no matter what, anything that's fortified will test for heavy metals. The quality of those metals, we don't know because but because we need to supplement iron, and some of those are metals. Like we're going to see that when we put a magnet to it, like they have to put that in there because our body needs some form of it. Um, so, so do I think that, and I mean, when what I gave my son as formula when he was younger, after I went back to work, would I have gotten him off of that at 1 year old? Absolutely. It was absolutely not the healthiest choice. I just didn't know. At the time, it was considered the healthiest choice. Like I was very conscious of this, but it was not the healthiest choice. And so what has happened in 10 years? There's likely some better formulas out there. I don't know of them, and I haven't had children since my daughter. And even then, like if I even threw out my daughter, who's about 4 years younger than my son, I think I did get her off formula as quickly as possible. And that's just a personal choice. By then, our children should be eating quite a bit of diversity, right? If we're starting them at 6 months old plus, my sister just had a child. So diversity is like huge. So we can be starting them off, and by 1, they can be having a very healthy diet that is outside of that and getting the calcium and iron and all of the nutrients they need from other areas. How to open detox pathways and how to detox. This is a great question and not something I would ever answer in a Q&A fully because it's going to be different for quite a few people, and I'll tell you why. So that you understand why the safety of this is so important is that number 1, we have to first know what happens, like what is giving us good detox. So if your child is constipated, they're going through illness, if they're going through any kind of other steps, or they're going through any other life supports, we don't start at detox. That's the worst thing you could do for your child, and this is why. If their detox pathways are not open, they're going to have basically it's like you're dumping something that it was like toxicity is put into our cells, our little fat cells, they'll absorb it and as a protective mechanism, so it's not in our body. When it is in our body, it causes destruction. It damages cells. It is absolutely very harmful. And for some, like when I did my detox specialty course, in some cases, people have literally died from doing detoxes. So I want, and as someone who has seen in healthcare chelation therapy go wrong, which is basically using a solution to detoxify, cancer patients will do this. Many people will do this. We do it safely in the program for a reason. There are multiple steps that need to be done. And so that brings me to really educating on, we want to make sure that our children's livers are number 1, awake. They're functioning effectively. They're functioning effectively and they're moving toxins through. And as a first approach, it's the same thing when we try with gut health first. A lot of people start with gut health as like a detox for gut, and then they want to tackle candida with supplements because they see it on a test. Well, the truth is that if the child's liver is, and you have a nonverbal child, if their liver is overburdened and you start to kill off candida, what happens to all of that toxic material that candida leaves behind as it dies? Do you think it just goes out the poop? No, much of it is actually reabsorbed and needs to be they're called metabolites. It needs to be processed in the liver. And so supporting the liver is a really important misstep in so many areas, dealing with autism or supporting autism naturally, that it's kind of a no-brainer for anyone who is dealing with an adult, for example. Like the liver is supposed to be supported. It has 500 functions. They're all important. The gut is also important, but we don't want to tackle too hard, like with a sledgehammer into that space. Okay. Have you heard of baths? Oh, of course. Detox baths are going to be a little bit more of a lesser intensive form. And of course, like it's like magnesium, right? Like we know that certain vitamins and minerals are going to be absorbed better through the skin. So yes, I have heard of the clay baths. Do we use them in the program? Some families do, and there are options, and we do have like sources and posts. I actually will eventually show you what that looks like. But absolutely, there's resources for detox baths. I prefer to use food as detox. I find it stimulating. I find that, and the thing that's nice about using a food for a detox purpose is that whether it's in its full form or it's in a juicing form, it's actually supporting the microbiome and the brain at the same time. So it's like you're using one thing to support multiple organs versus if you're using a supplement like milk thistle, for example, that's just supporting the liver, right? Like it's just doing that for that one thing. Families are sitting there trying to figure out how they're going to get these supplements into their kids when if they would take that same effort and energy in figuring out how to get their child to eat a piece of cauliflower or a piece of beet or a piece of, you know what I mean? It's like the effort is removed from the one thing that's going to give them the most results systemically. What are the signs of the liver not working properly other than jaundice? Oh my goodness, there are so many signs. Non-speaking children. So your child's, it's a missing piece, literally. Like when your child's liver starts working better, it's almost like it's very interconnected with the endocrine system. It's interconnected with the chemistry within the body. And chemistry also means oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, the things that also are happening in the brain. And so this is a really, so if your child is brain fogged, if they can't hold attention, if they don't have receptive language and cannot follow one-step directions, I would be looking at liver support as a first approach, and the gut at the same time. And as to feed diversity is what we usually do at first. Will eating clean naturally detox the liver? Of course, it sure can. The thing with eating clean and detoxifying the liver is there are very specific foods that detoxify the liver. And if you're not eating some of those every single day at a certain amount, it's not going to, your body is not going to be detoxing what we are being exposed to today. Like the reality is back in the day, like our grandparents did not need to eat the large amounts of liver detoxifying foods because they were just not exposed to as much. We have to evolve with the natural world the unnatural world that we're living in. My daughter has a hard time falling asleep and I want to help make her sleep longer. What can I use? I have heard, again, if you're asking me for supplements, I will not give any because I don't use supplementation. Sleep is not something you can supplement your way out of. There is an entire, and this is an entire part of the program. We have a place called Better Than a Baby, and it talks about the circadian rhythm and understanding that from the moment that you wake up, you're actually promoting your sleep the next night. So what you eat, what you consume, your light exposure outside, inside, and blue lights from screens are all going to impact your sleep. You cannot, you could take magnesium, melatonin, all these things, and it may work for about 3 or 4 days. But what we've seen is people come into the program addicted to melatonin, no longer producing their own, and they're not sleeping at all. And so none of these things are actually a long-term solution. The solution is actually learning about sleep and why the root of why we sleep, the root of the support of if you're not sleeping and your child is having intrusive thoughts, and that could be one of the things, especially when they're not falling asleep. It's like, okay, is it intrusive thoughts? Is it that they can't wind down? Is it because they've had screen time for more than 3 hours in the evening? Is it because there's like multiple things? And so those are the things that we break down in the program. And then of course, there are specific foods that are going to increase high quality sleep. So supplements are very like a Band-Aid. Like they are good. Like supplements will work for a short term, which is why they are called supplements. So we supplement, which means we do not live in that state. It's not going to train your child to sleep better. We have to actually help our children rehack their circadian rhythm so that they are sleeping naturally. And then that's what they get to live with, because a child who is not sleeping likely has some ADHD symptoms, which may not even have anything to do with ADHD, but difficulty at staying attention, hyperactivity, bad diet literally comes sometimes from lack of sleep, because the cravings when you are sleep deprived, I'm sure as an adult you know this, is going to be towards sugar, salt, and fat. So picky eating increases with sleeplessness. what are the foods for liver detox? There's a bunch of them. Like there's a ton of them. We go through them in the program based on where you're at. Some of them are going to support the first phase of detoxifying the liver, and some are going to support the deeper phase. I'm not going to tell you what they are. You can happily go look at them on Google. There's a reason for that. This is an open Q&A that where if I start to give out these foods and you decide that your child is ready for detox when they are not, and it comes back to me, that's my liability, because the truth is, if your child is not does not have their nutrition gaps filled, which is like nutritional therapy or just knowing that they're very nutritionally sound, then detoxification is not the first approach. And I do love talking about detox. I'm a big fan of detox. Don't get me wrong. I've seen detox though go wrong, even just with 10 mLs of a detox juice that's just all natural foods. I've seen a child go from like very calm to literally a roller coaster of a week-long reaction from that. So it's really, really important at first to either focus on getting to that 50 plants per week if you're not in a program like mine, to make sure that at least that nutritional component is being met. And that is the number. If you want it, and why is it not 35 like the other like a lot of the things you're seeing online? Well, 50 plants, if you were to go for a FMT, which is fecal transplant, then they're actually, the physicians will require that. They're going to require your child to eat 50 plants, or they won't even take you sometimes, just because that's what feeds a healthy microbiota that needs to be growing and thriving. And so that's really important, because the microbiome is also converting some of these things into nutrients. The liver gets the nutrients and delegates it out. And every time you go on a detox and you're not nutritionally where you should be, and you don't have you have nutrition gaps, the liver actually, because that's one of its functions, you actually lose more nutrients. You lose more heavy metals, even if you're just on a liver detox. And these could be good ones like copper and zinc. Healthy eating, no processed snacks. But lately I've been seeing more. So I've been focusing on the past 2 months on healthy eating, gluten and dairy free, amazing, no processed snacks. But lately I have been seeing more hyperactivity than usual. Why is this happening? Okay, so number one, that is amazing. I hope you're celebrating. I hope that you have a way to celebrate when you've been doing really well. What I'm seeing when and I mean, this is something that on one-to-one call, when we bring people in, we dive into what they're eating, because sometimes the focus is always on removal and not necessarily on the intentional way to use specific foods for calming. And so when you start to, like at first, when you remove these things, any elimination diets will generally give you some pretty good results. But if you're not focusing on a lot of diverse magnesium, zinc rich, iron rich foods that are not just like fruits and vegetables, there's like, plants are a huge spectrum. And so I would have to dig in just a little more on that question to ask, are there, like, I would have to ask, like, are they eating pulses? Are they eating legumes? Are they also eating like leafy greens? There's just so many different specific foods that are calmative that would reduce hyperactivity. If they have a high fruit diet, they're likely hyperactive. That's one thing to note, is that fruits are very good for us, but they still can create a lot of dysbiosis, especially if they're eating them throughout the day versus at different times, like specific times of day where that digestion is going to be better. Oh, this is a great question. How do I know if my child's diet is meeting their brain's developmental needs? So that is something that we actually prioritize in the program. Which actually I'm going to put, it is now open for enrollment. So I'm putting it in, I'm just putting the link for the page in the chat. So if anybody wanted to look at that, it absolutely, there is even now the ability to apply for a long payment plan for those who need it. But what we focus on when it comes to brain development is like, the first thing we look at is how can we support the liver? How can we help with the detox pathways? And all of these things are not complicated. Sometimes your child could be eating all the best foods, but we just need to be a little more intentional with certain, what would be the word I'm looking for? Food groups. Like food groups, some of them are often like, we tend to be very repetitive as human beings. So for example, this is a good example. The average family will eat about 7 meals and rotate them. even for kids. Like for kids, it might be even less if they're picky, but they rotate the same 7 meals. And then we get into like this flow because we are working families and we live in a world that like really loves the 9 to 5 support. So when we live in that cycle, we're habitual, and our brain likes that. Our brain likes to have habits so that it can learn new things in other areas. And so we are often missing very specific food groups that are going to support either brain development, either detox pathway opening. And once we just do this, like these little tweaks based on what your child is eating, then it's like magic happens. And for some people, they see results in as little as like a few days. Some of them it's in a few weeks, and some of them it's in a few months. So that's just where it was, the differences that we see within the program. Okay, this is a great question as well. How does improving gut health impact my child's ability to focus, learn, and speak? Because we're going back to gut health, I think this is super important. We have an entire section in the Blue Life Autism program where people learn exactly the answer to this question, which I am going to answer, is that the gut has fibers that go all the way up through the vagus nerve to the brain, right? And you've probably learned this a little bit when I was doing the training, and that we have enteric systems. So that means we have different systems with different gut bugs. And that how it impacts our child's ability to focus, though, learn, and speak is that no matter which pathway you look at in the gut, you are looking at all the information going from the gut up either the vagus nerve, the spine, the the bloodstream, or the microbes, and everything is going to the amygdala, which is literally one of the learning centers and emotional regulating centers. So if you feel good, like if we just bring ourselves through just the logic of it, if we feel good, if your child is feeling well, they are happy, and their memory is really good, is really well supported, then it just makes sense that their focus and their learning will increase and their academic performance will increase. My son could do whatever he wants in the world. He literally has an 80 average in everything mainstream. And he chooses, because he's very artistic, he chooses and loves and has a passion for acting and filming and directing. And so he's actually specializing in the next year in a special program to do that. But he has the choice. And I think that that's the beauty of when we use health for brain or food for brain development, it gives our children the ability to have choices that they may not have had before, regardless if families choose to keep their children with an autism diagnosis, or their child has an autism diagnosis. There is a difference between being non-functioning or going through depression, anxiety, OCD, all of the suffering pieces of autism. Those are symptoms that have an underlying support that could easily not be there. And food is literally that medicine. And the culture that we are in is the spoon that gives us the medicine. And by culture, it means that we want to be part of a community, right? We want to be around other people who are doing the same thing so that we can bring these habits in very consistently. Because coming to a call like this, right, where we're all together and we're motivated and we're excited, one of the things that it's great, but when we leave the call and we go back to a family that's eating Cheetos or Doritos, and it's Thanksgiving and it's all the things, I mean, we won't judge Thanksgiving, but let's just say it's a habit. Let's just say every weekend everybody's eating chips and we're eating pizza. If you're living in that, it's really hard to change. But when you have consistent interactions like this, then this one call is going to change your life, right? Or that culture is what's going to change your life. And we want that for our kids. Do you feed your son? Oh, definitely. I am a big proponent of organic foods. In the program, we have a lot of recipes and we have a lot of meal plans and we have all these things, but we also support this with the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. So the goal would be to really take that if it's economically not possible, there are ways around not eating organic foods, but if you have the opportunity to do so, that's great. And I mean, if you live in we have families in Ghana and Africa and areas where they don't know when they go to their grocery store, nothing is labeled organic. And so we're not going to stop eating because of that. We're going to just assume the worst and treat the food as if it just really does need that healthy cleaning. And just so you know, we have resources that we have an amazing community manager who actually has created this produce guide of cleaning for basically the different foods that you'll come across. Some of them will surprise you at how long they have to be soaked in order to be able to get the pesticides off. Took her a long time to do this resource. And these are things that are available on demand in the community. So yeah, so you don't have to eat organic if you can't afford it, or you live in a place where at least they market. That's amazing. I would suggest it, yes, because even the pesticide and just it still means there's pesticides on the stuff. It just means that there are organic pesticides that the body will not react to as much. Did you cut out bread, even gluten-free bread? We didn't even have, so this, I always tell people because I think it's so interesting because the world has changed so much since when we did our journey. So no, so I had to completely unlearn and relearn how to cook differently at the time. And I'm going to share that was in my favor. There was no gluten-free bread. There was no dairy-free options. So 10 years ago, this was not a thing in the town that we lived in. Now I can go to the grocery store and I have like maybe 10 to 15 different options for gluten-free bread. And I'm just like blown away. But before it was in my favor to not have that because emulsifiers are in there. Glyphosate can still be in there. And so, yes, I made everything from scratch, including our bread. I generally use like a combination of almond flour. I think back then was coconut flour and eggs. And now we have like such a better combination. Like these days, we've like bridged the gap of even grain-free eating if that's what people want. Buckwheat, arrowroot, psyllium husk, like these natural ingredients can create the exact same bread textures and taste that gluten used to do. So that is same thing with chapati. Like when I think about roti and chapati, like we have families who have made these amazing blended flour recipes that is so close that they're so happy and the kids don't even notice. They're quite happy it. And those are available. We have a lot of like recipe swaps within the community. So yes, it is amazing. The community is somewhere the families really need to get into. Are supplements necessary or can we do this entirely with food? I know I get the supplement question a lot because it's so promoted. Again, supplements were not a thing when I was going through this. They were very minimal. And I did use at one point a Whole Foods supplement, but it was so far into our journey. My son was already making like gains and milestones. And yes, did I notice a difference when we did add a Whole Foods non-processed supplement? We did see changes and I thought it was great. We use the doTERRA ones, the Whole Foods doTERRA supplements, and we still actually use them to this day. They take them sporadically in the winter. Where I live, we're 100% deficient in vitamin D. So there are certain things that we do have to consider. B12. I mean, even our cattle is injected with B12. It's really hard to get those. So yes, even gluten-free bread is highly processed. Yes, gluten-free bread is highly processed. You know, your best bet, and this may surprise you, is that when it comes to bread, what I have learned, and again, bread is something I wouldn't even recommend kids eating every day anyways. But what we did is we are very privileged where I live to have a not gluten-free, a high quality ancient grain sourdough bakery. And this reduces gluten within it so exponentially when it has a double fermentation process. And the quality of the bread is so soft and good that kids generally can swap out to that. But the problem, what we see is that when I see families introduce something like this, is that the children start to not eat other things. And so focusing on the foods that are going to nourish the gut, not that sourdough doesn't nourish the gut, but not making sure that we're not losing, resistant starch fibers that feed our microbiome is important as well. Okay. I answered that question a little bit. This is a good question. Is this approach scientifically backed and how does it compare to traditional therapies? This is a very, very in-depth question. I like it. Okay, so lifestyle medicine is actually foundationally backed. Yes, it's scientifically backed. It literally comes, when I did my lifestyle medicine certification, I've done 2 of them actually. It was with Weill Cornell, like, one of the most prestigious medical schools in the United States. And so this is like their affiliation with the ACLM, which is the American College of Lifestyle Medicine for Physicians. And because I worked in healthcare, I was able to take this program. And so when I did the certification with my business partner, we learned so much about how foundationally food impacts our cellular structures. That's how it's scientifically backed. And there is data because of that. And because now the first area that we could study was with adults because adults have a voice to use their, to speak. But now lifestyle medicine is being bridged into Alzheimer's, into Parkinson's, into areas that now we know have familiarities with autism and exactly same components of brain support. So, and there are meta-analysis studies now for autism and lifestyle medicine. I posted one in my Instagram before in one of the posts down below, where I cited 10, maybe 20 lifestyle medicine meta-analysis studies. If you don't know what that means, it means it takes a whole bunch of studies together to prove that this is beneficial. And so most people like meta-analysis studies more. And so, yes, it is very scientifically backed, and that's why our approach is so unique at Blue Life RX, is that we focus on this approach as a foundation. And there are no other programs out there yet that do this. I foresee that changing, and I hope that changes. There is only so much that we can do, but it is definitely a very unique approach. And it is without supplementation. So it is pretty great. And how does it compare to traditional therapies? I don't want to knock therapies because I don't think that that's my approach. And I think that for us, we didn't see a lot of gains with therapies, but some kids do. So I don't want to say that that's not the truth. Number one, connection with a therapist is going to be huge. And some children will connect with their therapist and some of them won't. My son was so far within himself, he couldn't even look up to his own name. So engaging in therapy was not even something that was possible at all. And so it's almost like when you're using therapy, you're actually accessing a different part of the brain. If you've ever read The Power of Habits, which likely most people have not, or there's The Power of Habits and there's Atomic Habits, which that one was almost written as a kind of byproduct of the other. We learn quickly that there is a part of the brain that is literally built in repetition. And that is not the same place as adaptability or memory. And so it's like we're currently doing the same thing. What we want to do is we want to build a child who can adapt to their environment. Not that I think there's anything wrong with us as a society being inclusive and creating environments that are a little bit safer. But what if your child didn't even need it? What if your child could go into any environment and thrive? Why are we not taking, to me, it's like, why are we not looking at that as well? Because now we know that it's possible. We could do both, right? We can meet partway and create a little more of this inclusivity and adaptable spaces. But what if your child could just be so happy and regulated that, yeah, they could be different. They could be diagnosed with autism, but they're still thriving. And I think that that's the approach that we highly focus on in the Blue Life RX kind of mission, is that we're not here to necessarily change our children's differences. We're here to enhance their quality of life so that they don't suffer. And that is why our program is lifetime access. It's so that we can see these kids all the way through to the end, so that they have support when they need it. We have 15 calls per month for implementation, for different things, whether it be mindset, whether it be nutrition and strategy, whether it be picky eating, whether it be self-care, whether it be parents needing, whether it's being connected to other people who are in the same space. We have calls for all these: planning, implementing, strategy, and of course, long sustain. Like, we want to create something with you and collaborate to create a life, not just for us, but for our kids in the future. We can't keep going watching our kids eat high processed foods the way that they are and hope that a supplement's going to help them. The truth is that yes, high processed foods are there because we still continue to buy them, and that they are, for the first time ever in our history, our brains are shrinking. We're going the opposite way that we used to. So our brains have been growing because we have been becoming smarter. We evolve very well. We are using all of these things. And this is the first time in something like 70 years that our brains have shrunk. There's actual data of that. And it is because 70% of the average, this is neurotypical child, it's 70 to 80, I think 90% now is ultra processed. Whereas our kids on the spectrum, sometimes it's 100%. So we do have to kind of rip the Band-Aid off. And I promise you, if you overcome picky eating, you will have a different child on the other side, and you will be able to see a child wake up before your eyes. And that is why we focus a lot on this portion, even though we are doing all the rest. We're doing the detox, the gut restoration, all of those pieces are there. They're not difficult, but we do have to learn to get our brains in the game to implement and create these habits, not just for them, but for us. Okay. I see, hold on. Do I see another question come in? Sorry, most people are using the Q&A today, which is totally fine. Thank you guys for staying in so late. I have a couple more. I just want to see if there are newer ones. Oh, this is a very common. My child only eats beige foods. How do I start to introduce gut-friendly foods without resistance? So we have in the program, we have a picky eating support, and it's not just for picky eaters. It's also amazing for ARFID eaters and also sensory eaters. There are different stages, and we know how to support kids to start from eating beige foods to eventually eating colorful foods, but we use what's working for them. We literally make this so simple. That's why it's called the Bring the Fun Back to Mealtime program. And that is our first approach. And while we're doing this, we're also being intentional. If your child is a picky eater and you're scared you can't do the program, just going through the picky eating part will support mitochondria, open up the detox pathways, and feed the brain and the gut. Like that's what we all like. That's like the multi-system approach that we've created in our picky eating program. So that once you're done picky eating, all of those like kind of criteria have been met so that you can hit the ground running in nutritional therapy, detox, lifestyle medicine supports, and gut restoration, like in that order. It's absolutely phenomenal what happens when people go through this. Do you take into considering yes, co-infections are huge. So do you take into consideration other possible co-infections like Lyme, Candida, viruses, mold, etc.? Yes, so we do. When families go through the detoxes, we actually do 5 pretty in-depth assessments. These are scientifically backed assessments where we look at mycotoxins, which are usually they are the result of mold. We also look at, and also Candida falls in there, and viruses. We also look at heavy metals. We also look at liver toxicity and overburden. We look at GI toxicity, and we look at overall detox capacity. And then we build something from there based on where your kids are at. For some families, when they come in, if their children are still kind of picky, but they do eat, like, let's just say 35 to 50 plants per week, and their detox pathways are working well, we know that we can start with conceptual, like concepts of detoxification, which is being very intentional for short bursts of time with detox foods that will actually tackle each of these. So not only are we intentional with treating one of these, we automatically treat all of them. So not only do people come through the program and just do let's just say a mold protocol, they're going to start with the liver no matter what. Even if they have no liver toxicity, it's not going to hurt them to have a liver support done. They're going to go into heavy metals, as that can sometimes bind to candida, so we focus on that next. And then we do mycotoxins, which is candida, viruses, and mold. And then lastly, we do GI before we go into gut restoration. There is an order to this, and we actually check mark all the boxes. My thoughts are, it's not going to hurt if you're using food to treat every single one of these, and it can be treated with food. Then why wouldn't we just do it all? And so that is our approach in the program, is that we just intentionally bring in the ingredients to tackle each and every one of those in very specific, timely bursts. And in the other time, we focus on nutritional therapy, which is filling your child's nutrition gaps in between these little bursts to make sure that the liver never gets depleted, to make sure that we're always helping with that recalibration, that moving the stuff out in a healthy way for a child that age. So I hope that makes sense. But yeah, for me, I think if we're going to treat it all anyways, we don't really need to spend $10,000 on testing. And you'll still have the assessments to know. And the beauty of having assessments is you pay for the program once and you can retest you, your family, your husband, your grandma, if she's part of the system, and you can actually treat the entire family for one price, which that is why we wanted to create something that we could see the kids on forever, but we understand that it is a family unit. If you are not well as the parent, it is so hard to pour from an empty cup. I know, because I did it for years. I am you. I'm not even like you. I am just like an earlier version of you. And I've been through all of this. And I was so depleted. I wish that someone, remember they showed that picture, I think the meme that everybody has seen where, there's somebody drowning and the government's like high-fiving this person. And then they're just like, you feel like another autism mom is who's going to lift you up and give you their survival guide. And so far, our survival guide, my survival guide, has literally shown so much success for our families in the program, and we never quit on them. So if you have ever wanted to be part of a community where literally it's a village behind not just your child, even though that is the main priority at the beginning, but your entire family. This is where you want to be. So that's just, I'm not going to end it on that. There's a couple more questions, so I do have time to answer them. But yeah, so long story short, we take care of all of the things. And in our gut restoration, what's kind of nice about it is that it's not, we always make sure that you're eating, your kids are eating enough. There's no, as a practitioner, it's really important for me to build plans that are at least 2,000 calories so your children are getting the building blocks they need. So don't worry, it's not eating soup all week. There is some soup recipes in some of them, but some kids like soup. But there's also the opportunity of bringing in the specific foods that are going to heal and seal the gut. But at the same time, there's never a time where you're going to feel like your child is depleted. We take all of these things into consideration. And there are juicing protocols, should people want that. There are smoothie protocols, should people want that. There are meal plans, should people want just the food plans. There are concepts for people who just want to bring in the specific foods without recipes. There are recipes if some, like literally doesn't matter if you are like on the Myers-Briggs, which of these places you fall, whether you're a thinker, a planner, a doer, or a feeler, I made the program for you. I took into consideration each type of learning and implementation. You will thrive there if you show up. All right. What are your thoughts on tap water in terms of toxins and metals? Yeah, really, it's dependent on where you live. There is an entire portion of this that was talked about in my detox place. Like, for example, Chicago and New York have different toxins. It's actually, and different heavy metals in their water. And it's one of the reasons why Chicago pizza tastes so good, or New York pizza tastes so good. The minerals and specific metals in that water actually increase a better tasting crust. So it's going to be dependent on where you live. It's going to be dependent on your government's implementation system for taking out toxins in water. Like it might be higher in chlorine. So the answer, my short answer is yes, tap water has a lot of toxins no matter where you live. I am very privileged where I live. Our town voted against fluoride, and that was huge. So we have not had fluoride in our tap water. I think we're going on about 8 years now. And our physicians complained about it at first because a lot of kids were showing up with cavities and all of these issues, but they were not looking at what these kids were eating. And so now that we know, we educate better, right? We educate better that fluoride, naturally occurring fluoride, actually does come in some foods like spinach and green leafy vegetables. So yes, I think that water being something that is necessary for us to drink, to have, like, we're basically 80% of that. That means we need to constantly replenish it, is a high priority in the toxicity area to support. We use RO water and remineralize it when I remember, but we buy it from a company and we keep our bottles out of the sun so that we don't get any BPAs or any of the things like that. Potentially we could, for example, get, if you want to know what I recommend, that I don't mind. I think that from what I'm seeing, some people recommend the Berkey, some people recommend the AquaTrue. One of our members actually had her water tested in her Berkey though, and like after just having brand new filters put in, and it tested the same as their tap water. So I'm not sure from that experience. I tend to lean more towards recommending the top of the counter AquaTrue, which is I think what most people are now recommending as well. But again, remineralize your water. Yes, definitely. The question is, do you recommend storing food in glass versus plastic? And should I get glass baby bottles? Yes, if you have a child, then it is a good practice. Well, I'm going to share something. We can get bottles now that are BPA free and technically should be good. My only issue with it is that now we tend to lean towards ease and putting our things through the sanitation in our dishwasher, and it's the hottest setting, which will leach the most out of your plastic. So your way that you're cleaning, if you're microwaving it, so there's a lot of things you can see that that will be they're to be considered. We live in a very, very industrialized world where it's not even just about the one thing that you're doing now. It actually is about the 10 other actions that you could be doing in between taking the bottle and giving it to your child, or taking it out of the like super hot dishwasher, filling your powder in, putting it in another heated microwave, and then, you know what I mean, bringing it to your child. There's all these extra steps we do have to think about that can increase the toxicity level of what we do. So does it hurt to have glass bottles? No. Is it better? Yes. But it depends how much heat your plastic bottles are getting. So I hope that kind of makes sense. All right, I have a few last questions. I've tried so many things before. What makes this approach different, and why should I trust it? The truth is that each person you meet in the world will be different. And creating a belief around one experience is basically like saying, and I do like this question because I've used this before, is like saying that after that first boyfriend or after that first girlfriend, you decided never to date again. And you gave some of these people your biggest asset, which is your heart. So for me, I like to look at it as we could try a lot of things. Each one is going to be different. And rather than sometimes looking at the negative, if there was a negative experience, which I hope not, we tend to really focus on providing a high quality experience from the start all the way through the program. But and we invest a lot of everything that comes in back into our members so that they get that best experience possible, especially as we grow. But the important thing to note is that each person's going to be different. Your experience is a past experience and it's something you learned from, but it shouldn't stop you from moving forward and trying a new experience. And I think that if we think about, I'll give another example. There's a lot of people in the world right now that try to sell you on MLM companies or money making or build your own course. Oh my gosh, I don't know how many I see on Instagram selling stuff or affiliates. It's one of those things that at the end of the day, I myself have purchased some of these courses, and did I ever regret one of them? No, I learned one thing. Maybe it didn't bring me to where I wanted to go, so I had to build on that. But in our program, the focus is to be I don't want to call it a one-stop shop. That's actually terrible language, but it's a one-stop to get everything you need. I have 8 certifications, some of them in weight loss, some of like clinical weight loss for diabetes and heart disease, but I also have a brain development certification. I have a detox certification, nutritional therapy certification. Like I really went out of my way to provide an experience that really would have everything we needed. And then when I found out in our program that was lacking, that I was still lacking in the sense that I didn't have people for mindset and I didn't have someone for trauma and I didn't have someone for parenting and helping with transitions and behavior. Guess what we did? We didn't just stop. No, we found those people and we found, to me, the best of those people. And they are part of our experience. And if they aren't, then we definitely pay for them to go through training to be part of that experience. We do have and that's a little joke because our one-day parenting coach is probably on this call watching as well. But that's the goal. The goal is when we see that there is something missing, if it's within our means, that we want to provide it if it's going to make families successful. And so that's what we did. Okay, last question. Are there any Black Friday deals to sign up for? I wish I could give Black Friday deals. Unfortunately, because our team grows so quickly based on the amount of people that come in so that people have the best experience, it's more like a clinic setting in the sense that you're basically, think of it as when you make this investment, it's like a health investment and a lifestyle investment that you're making for your whole family, but it pays for an entire very, very highly professional team. We have a physician, trauma specialist, and compassionate coach, trauma specialist and compassionate coach, health coach. And then we have myself, we have our community manager, and all of these like alone. And right now I have not raised the price for any of these. Like I basically I didn't start there, but since we've put the price at what it is today, which is $5,000, we actually have not increased it after adding all of this support. It's like over $20,000 worth of support. Not gonna lie, alone, just the community manager for what she does and her availability and her ability to help families overcome picky eating is worth the price of the program. So, and that's not even including myself and the other coaches. So I do want people to really understand that the value is not something that we can really discount. So, and it is, and we've never discounted. So what we choose to do in the world instead is and I'm sure you guys can appreciate this, is that once a year we hold 2 scholarships, and they are for very, very low economical parts of the world, depending, and it changes yearly, and usually for families that are a 1-income family and that are really, really struggling. And those are through application, and they get the full, like, it's not a discount, they get the full the full program, everything that goes with it. And we do at least 2 of those a year. And so it's our way of giving back is like giving out $10,000 worth of services. So I'm sure you can appreciate that we do this part, and that is how we give back for now. I'm sure in the future, that is also why I create all of my resources, like my Feed the Good Bugs challenge and my Screen Less challenge and my Picky Eating challenge. These are all free. And that is how I give back. Many families, if it is completely out of your budget, have gotten almost to where they needed to be and are happy with having those free resources available and accessible. We do currently have a couple of different financing options that you can look at. Our financing options, some of them are supposed to be up to 44 months, which I'm going to say it's probably going to have a higher interest rate, but I think the payments could be as low as something like $44 a month. So to me, there is always a way to access what you need and what you want. And sometimes we have to get a little bit, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, think outside the box. I've had to do this many times myself. When, for example, I transitioned from healthcare, I took my life savings and my pension and I put it into learning how to serve you guys. In this way. And it was a big risk. It was one that I don't regret ever, but definitely had a lot of learning and ups and downs. But I was resourceful. And I think that is who I call into our program as well. Our family, it's American. It is American. And because that's just the currency that everybody understands. And it is going up in January to accommodate for all this. So this is like our last open enrollment period where we are going to be offering it at that price. And just because of all of the things that we finally added in, but it had to happen eventually, and that's where we're at. But otherwise, I am so grateful. I think I've answered most of your questions, and we had such an interactive group. It's actually December 31st. Even though this is a public enrollment period, we do not stop people from enrolling. Otherwise, we just have to have that conversation. Through Messenger or through the webinar, there is the ability to enroll. But this enrollment period is done December 4th. So, and there is something about starting with a group, just so everybody knows, that is really fun, because when you're starting kind of at the same levels and you're going through the same things at the beginning, there's a kind of connection that happens, especially in a world where we feel very alone. So we do this a little bit differently based on that. It's a different experience based on that. But of course, I cannot wait to see some of you in. I hope that this inspired you, that you enjoyed the Good Bugs Challenge, that I answered most of your questions, that you understand that safety is first, that food is medicine over supplements as well. And I will talk with you guys soon.